Germany, Austria. It came to Germany for graduate engineering and a career in Germany, plant management, and so forth. Okay, I managed to come into the United States, and as I said, the visa that we got was a piece of paper typed on stationery of the US consulate in Marseille, France, by a vice consul who was so appalled at the way that the State Department was treating refugees, particularly Jewish refugees, that he connived with an American who came from the Emergency Rescue Committee that included Eleanor Roosevelt to get Walter Benjamin, Mark Chagall, Hannah Arendt, Arthur Koestler, and so forth out of Europe. He included in this affidavit in lieu of a passport, which was recognized at the time because after World War I, they were also stateless persons. My Belgian identity card was worth nothing. My parents' Belgian passports or Austrian passports were worth nothing because Hitler had taken over. But according to German customs, he wouldn't hand us, particularly Jewish us, a passport. So he put a 4-digit number at the bottom of the affidavit, and the immigration officer on the dock at Staten Island said, okay, you're in, welcome to America, and went on to the next person. When I mentioned this to somebody who was part of this cabal in Marseille, France, who was a fellow German, he was born in Danzig, which is technically not Germany. It was a free state sandwiched between East Pomerania, which was German, and what is now part of Poland. And this was a professor. He was a runner for this group in Marseille because he looked younger than his 19 years and had blonde hair, blue eyes. So the Germans just weren't going to bother with him. And he was, going and trying to help these refugees get out. And I met him because there was an article about him in the New York Times that he was a professor at age 97 at Bard College in Avon on the Hudson in New York State. And he and I had a talk, and I told him about this number thing on the affidavit. And his reaction is, that's impossible. And I said, no, it's not impossible. Tonight I'll be at my son's house. He has a scanner. He has a copy of this document because he's trying to keep a family history, and he'll fax it or email it to you, whatever you want. He still wouldn't believe me. And I'm here. Now, on the generic topic of dehumanization, I was going to give a talk here about seeing Donald Trump as in a historical context. And I wanted really to take a historical view. So I went all the way back to the Muslim invasion of Spain in 711 AD, where there was already an explosion of killing because of religion, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and it got only worse in the 15th century, 16th century, 17th. As you know, time of Isabella and Ferdinand, they had They literally burned people alive, Jews, Muslims, other minorities, for religious reasons. Today, people are killing each other for political reasons. And the Trump crowd tried to change the election, even though the courts decided that Joe Biden is the legitimate president of the United States. There are people here who, in Illinois, in New York State, in California, who sincerely believe that Trump won the election. And there's obviously this controversy is more or less constrained, unlike the Burmese, the Myanmar, burning Rohingya villages because they're Muslims, they're not Buddhists. Bosnians who don't like Serbs and were 8,000 men and boys were exterminated at Srebrenica. I can give you a lot of other examples. I mean, you talk about dehumanization. Killing somebody is really saying you're as good as a cat or a dog that I want spayed or worse. Let's just kill them. And I tried to understand why this change occurred from religious animosity to political animosity. And honestly, I don't feel I have an answer. I'm an economist by training, a strategic planner by profession. One of the things that I've learned in my 92 years is if you don't know the answer, admit it. It's better. It's not better only for me, it's also better for you, because someone outside of your knowledge can lead you into some insight that you will not have by yourself. In the previous class with Dr. Wolf's class, I talked about the fact that I headed up a innovation group in my 26-person outfit of strategic planning at AT&T, the parent company, the telephone company. And I told a story about we're being presented with a request to get around the problem that if you dial internationally, you have to have more digits than 908-647-5769. You have to have 17 or 20 digits. And this was solved because an English major said, well, what if there was a skyhook and you could lift out of the central office this stupid thing that only takes 10 digits and substitute something with more? And in the group, the engineers started to laugh, except for one who said, wait a minute. She's not so dumb, okay? There is a new device that operators are using, and somebody must know about this. What's it called? Traffic service position something. And somebody else said, yeah, I know. That's a computer where there's a called screen and a calling screen, and it has as many digits as you want, because computers don't give a damn about how many digits there are. If the telephone company says 10, the computer says no matter what. We solved that problem at $10,000 a central office instead of ripping out an $8 million piece of equipment that was working fine, okay? So the new ones were optoelectronic and even more expensive, but no need. This solved this problem. And so the 8 minorities in the borough of Queens, which is 2.5, 3 million people, were able to call abroad anywhere to South America, Central America, Nigeria, whatever, for 25 cents a minute instead of $3 a minute. There's quite a difference. Okay. Okay. Dehumanization. It seems to me the origin of this is probably as old as mankind. That initially, if you read the Bible, if you read the Quran, if you read the history, don't worry, that's my cell phone getting ads. The tendency is to say us and them, okay, regardless, skin color, ethnicity, education, richness, poverty, them, okay? And it goes in both directions, okay? For example, with inequality, you get very quickly that poor people think rich people are a bunch of thugs, and rich people who think the poor are a bunch of thugs. Okay, and this extends across. And part of the problem, I think, is this us-them mentality. And what worries me is that very few of us have what I learned as a board member at Guilford College in North Carolina from a Quaker couple who have a reputation on campus as being the both and couple, because they're forever saying, why can't you see both and instead of us, them? And they were very kind. They met me at a Quaker conference. They introduced me to the assistant to the president. I was invited to join the board. I've been on the board for 43 years, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about this both and as opposed to us, them. I think if you are honest, when you look in the mirror, you will see there's a tendency in you for the us, them view of life. If you will admit, unconscious as much as conscious. One of the things that I was struck by, I came to the United States as an 11-year-old. You know, in the question and answer, if you want, I'll tell you more about my autobiography. But you're more than welcome to go to Wikipedia. I'm there, you can read it. I've written a bunch of articles. I have chapters that I've written for my grandchildren who could care less in their 20s. They're not interested in what the old man has to say. But when they get to be 50, they're going to start asking questions, and I'm not going to be around. And so I've written these chapters, early memories from 0 to 10, the war years, the first years in America, Choate School, Swarthmore College, Princeton, and so forth. And for example, I landed in America at age 11. For me, Black people were fascinating. When I was a refugee in France during the World War II, my mother and I were arrested as Germans. And the jailer told my mother that he was sending her to a women's concentration camp on the Spanish border. And she said, look, if it has to be, it has to be. But what will you do with my 10-year-old? And he said, lady, you're 40 years old. You're in good health. You're likely to survive, even if you have to stay the winter. your 10-year-old will not survive. Okay, you're going to be near a swamp at 3,000 feet in the Pyrenees Mountains. Okay, you leave your son with us. We'll take care of him. And hopefully you will get out of that camp alive and well. Well, they put me in a home for delinquent children. So now I have an excuse. Anything that you find offensive in my language, in my attitudes, in my personality, it's all the fault of the French. But one of the things that I experienced at that time is that right next to the home for delinquent children was a veterans hospital. Why don't you hit turn off? Thank you. Was a veterans hospital with hundreds of troops, individuals from the French colonies in West Africa, because, you know, most of West Africa had been colonized by the French in the 19th century. And I was talking to these guys, you know, big 6'5" Senegalese, black as coal, wonderful people. They loved talking with me because they had children of their own. And I wrote my mother a letter that, needless to say, she kept and I now have, which said, I wrote her, you remember how excited I was about Negroes, which is what the French word is, and that I always wanted to be a Negro. And it was a genuine sentiment. So I landed in America at age 11, and I was attracted to people who were African Americans. And I found it so strange that the longer I lived in this country, the more I found out that there was a prejudice against African Americans. And I think this illustrates that depending upon where you come from and what your education, unconscious education has been, you have different attitudes, okay? Whether it is race, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's us, them, or both and. How am I doing on time? No, I was supposed to start at 12:30. I did. Okay, so I must have 30 minutes. What I'm asking the class is, let's go with the questions. For example, confessional. Is there someone among you who's had an experience of dehumanization, such as I had as a refugee in France? I don't know what the proportions were, but some of us thought we were, some of them thought we were vermin. We were people who were eating the food, the meat, the oil, the fats that they would have eaten had we not come there as refugees. Has that happened to one of you? That people resented your being in the country, be it as an immigrant, be it as a native-born American? What do you think? Has it happened? Yeah. Okay, for the benefit of the electronic audience, one of the questions raised was a Jewish child in a neighborhood encounters a neighbor who paints a red swastika in response to what she obviously, the child or possibly her parents, felt was a stranger among us, an unwanted stranger among us. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly right. And, you know, it was for a little bit of an example of the contrary. I was home alone in the hotel where we were staying in Montpellier, I think, in southern France. And there was a telephone call for my parents who were at the movies. So, you know, I was 10 and a half. I went to the cashier at the movies and I said, there's an important telephone call from my parents and they're watching the movie. I'd like to get them out, but I don't want to pay the entrance fee. The guy said, go ahead, find your parents. I got them. In other words, I was being welcomed by this cashier who understood, okay, the poor kid's a refugee, he has to get his parents, that's fine. The opposite happened. German soldiers were patrolling the streets in unoccupied France, okay, in uniform. The armistice decree said surrender on demand. That was Article 41 of the armistice agreement. Said any person requested by the German authorities, the French would produce, you know, male, female, refugee, whatever. And my father explained that he was in a concentration camp for men where he had been sent because he was considered a German by the Belgian authorities. And they had taken 40 men and put them in a boxcar and pushed them over the French frontier and said, you figure out what to do with these guys. And the French said, geez, let's put them in a concentration camp. So they told all of the refugees from the Franco War in Spain, the sort of pseudo war that the Nazis who supported Franco as a right-wing guy and the communists who supported the rebellion against Franco. And they fought each other in a war in Spain, which, sort of went by itself. But once Franco won and these revolutionaries fled across, when on the eastern side of the Pyrenees Mountains, they disappeared. They're basically, it's the seashore. But within a couple of miles, there are mountains 2,000-3,000 feet high. So they would stream around in sort of a Hail Mary pass, and the French arrested them, put them in a camp, all the men. The French are very particular. They treat the women differently than the men, period. The language says le and la. And even a 5-year-old can bawl me out for not knowing the difference. And so they emptied the plant, the concentration camp of these refugees from the Spanish Civil War and put my father and the men there. My point is that these men in the camp had a terrible case of diarrhea in the summer. It's hot. So they asked the former prisoners in the camp if they could go to the butchers and get some bones that could be burned into carbon, into charcoal, and the charcoal given to the refugees in the camp to stop the diarrhea. I want to emphasize the happenstance. I tried on one of the faculty people in Springfield. Do you know the word adventitious? And she didn't. And this is exactly what I encountered. There is an adventitiousness in being a refugee. Good things happen, bad things happen. And who can predict it? Other comments, or shall I ask you some more questions? Go ahead.
So you mentioned that us versus them existed prime demand, but do you feel that there is something special about modernity that may change that dynamic or make it more or accelerate it, so to speak? I'm thinking honestly about some of Arendt's writing on the banality of evil or the rise of authoritarianism. I'm curious if you feel like there's anything different about the present day versus the us versus them mentality in the past of humanism.
The question is, do I feel that there is something different about modern times as opposed to, Aboriginal fights hundreds, thousands of years ago of us versus them? And the answer, frankly, is no, I don't. And I've spoken at a number of sessions where issues of the Holocaust and was the Holocaust unique, and there were points of view, and I said I didn't feel they were unique. And my friends at Guildford said, Walter, why does it have to be either or? Is it possible that it can be both and? That there are elements in the Holocaust that are absolutely unique, namely the German factory approach to killing 6 million Jews and homosexuals and transgender people and gypsies and anyone against Hitler. Catholic, Protestant, didn't mind. If you're against Hitler, you go to Dachau. The reason why my father left Germany was that he was a patent attorney in a firm that had a client who sold shoes made in a factory that had these ripple soles made of rubber. So they were very comfortable, even on parquet or Belgian blocks, streets, and so cobbled stock streets. And when the client of the firm was offered a choice of selling the whole factory to a Nazi bigwig or going to an extermination camp near Munich called Dachau, he got the point. He said, go ahead, take your factory, because he knew that he had patents all over Europe and North America and Africa and Australia and Japan, and that German couldn't sell a single shoe outside of Germany legally, that it was possible to enforce the patent. And so my father and the chief engineer were asked to move to Brussels, and that's how it came to leave Germany, okay? And the reason I tell you that is that adventitious, the guy leaving, and having my father, the patent attorney, which in Europe is 80% engineering and 20% law, and the exactly reverse of patent lawyers here. Although there are many patent lawyers I have since discovered who have PhDs, and there was one of them in the morning session. My point is, what in your lives, and you represent quite a mixed audience here, in your lives in America, in your lives before you came to America. I assume that a number of you are immigrants or students who are getting an education in this country. Remind you of this dehumanization of an attitude by a client of the law firm who said, you sell me a factory or I'll get rid of you. I'll have you shot by the SS. For me, modernity isn't that different. There is a difference. At Dr. Caldwell's house on Sunday night, there was a gentleman from India who I had a chance to have dinner with. I talked with him. And I asked him, what is it that makes Hindus kill, burn trains full of Muslims today? The same thing happened with the army, the Myanmar, Burma army with Rohingyas, who are Muslims who were living in grass huts, and they burned the huts and burned the Rohingya in the huts to the point where 1 million Rohingyas walked into Bangladesh as refugees, into internment camps that are the biggest in the world. And it's still happening in India, in Pakistan. You remember the story of Malala, the teenager who was shot in the head because she favored an education for girls. And you've read, you know, the Taliban are trying to do this in Afghanistan. I have a picture of a Peace Corps volunteer in a volleyball court in the middle of a school of girls, of course, only. And she was teaching them volleyball. And my desk officer, a previous volunteer, was on one side and she was helping the girls on the other side. So we had two strangers. If I had published or shown that picture in certain other centers in Afghanistan, I would have been lynched, period. Because most of that country is still in the throes of seeing women as chattel, as commodities. They cook, they clean, they have children, they are partners in a marriage, but they're not quite the human beings that men are. Okay? Is that similar, or is modernity not very different? And again, it differs by country, it differs by attitudes toward religion. But I think I see in modernity, for example, I'm an immigrant to the United States. Sunday night, I was asked, are you worried about democracy in this country when there's such a polarity between right and left? And I said, I'm not enthusiastic, far from it. I see the challenge, but I am so impressed with this institutional memory, if I can call that, the laws and people willing to abide by the laws, willing to abide by courts. They're not perfect. You know, if you look at the percentage of African Americans who are in jail, it's horrendous compared to whites and to other countries. On the other hand, the French have the same problem with North African Muslims, which they consider strangers. And the police go after them, just as, you know, in Germany, people went after Jews. Somebody else. Remember, the point of a classroom is to have a dialogue, not a monologue. And I'm sure that Dr. Rice doesn't have a monologue with your class. So speak up. I'm going to repeat. Oh, go ahead.
No, you
Just
can
go
take,
ahead.
you don't have to repeat now because I'm standing. I was thinking about what you were saying, Jacob, about modernity, right? And I was thinking about kind of like dehumanization, and also how dehumanization sometimes becomes easier when we become not, I'm not saying I like it. I'm saying we become desensitized to certain things, which makes it easier to dehumanize people. And I was curious when I think about modernity, what your take is on how technology over time has had an impact on that, because surely you've seen different things since your experience as a child to now. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are of kind of all those running together. I'm just thinking how they're all kind of related in different ways. So if you wouldn't mind.
Well, even the, what do you call it, YouTube audience has understood the question. I guess that I'm not sure how much modernity affects that. This same Indian gentleman Sunday night was talking about rationality as absent from the controversy that I explained about Muslims and Hindus. And my reaction to him Sunday night, which I don't think I got a chance to say, is I don't think it's an issue of rationality. It's emotions. It's much deeper. As you know, there's supposed to be a frontal cortex, a middle cortex, and then the limbic cortex. And my sense is that differences that are exacerbated by parents will change the attitudes of very small children. Okay. So if you stick an African American 5 months old next to a white American 5 months old, they play together or they don't play together, but it has nothing to do with race. However, if you take my daughter going into, I think, the last of the kindergarten classes, she had a Black friend in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, whom she just loved. And they played together, they were inseparable. The moment they went into first grade, it changed. The Black girl was unwilling to play with Catherine. And Catherine came home and said, "Why doesn't so-and-so play with me anymore?" And I had to start explaining American prejudice about African Americans to a 5-year-old. Modernity has its advantages, by God. Many of us are alive because of vaccines, because of medical technologies, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, I don't think the limbic system has changed much. And when you get to certain events, that limbic system gets in, and maybe that's part of this us-them mentality. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about evolutionary psychology. But the sense I have is that we as adults have got to learn to see things more both and than either or, modernity or not modernity, technology or not technology. Okay, you've got 13 minutes left.
changed. Like as neuroscientists will tell you that we're hardwired for two things, that we're hardwired for connection and we're hardwired for threat. And oftentimes people say, well, I'm not a threat. But I'm reminded of a quote by C.S. Lewis who says, the foreign mind is hostile. So as long as something remains unfamiliar to you, and I always find that curious because when you look throughout history, look at this room. I mean, the proximity. So if something is foreign to you, why is that the case? I mean, it's that willful engagement of ignorance. And I think as long as the other remains an other or it's foreign, that hostile mind will persist. So as long as you see someone as a threat, the brain is hardwired. And so when we talk about in my role as the vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion for the system office, I find it funny that part of my job is to somehow help people rewire their brains. And I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna ever be that effective to do that, right? Because that's part of it. It's like, what does bias mean? Unconscious bias means that your brain is hardwired for threat detection. So as long as I see somebody as different from me and I see them as a threat, I'm going to flee. I'm going to fight, right? Those are typically that flee or flight response that we all have. And so I think part of it is if we can be curious, if we can, de-emphasize difference in a way that not that I have to be like you to be accepted, but somehow we can come to this agreement and understand and accept each other. I think that's part of the solution. But as long as we kind of stay in our corners and see people as different or as a threat, we are hardwired automatically to distance ourselves from that, right? That hostility will be there. And if we want to have more friendliness, I would say, and that welcoming attitude that we talk so often about, that obviously I promote as a DEI leader, and that's necessary for us to thrive in harmony. But as long as we continue that distance and a few other data points I want to share, even as we talk about young people, it is like a lot of hope and promise with you all, right? Even looking in this room. But one of the things when we look at the data, I think it's specifically about a Pew Research Center study that showed that our lives are still very stunningly segregated. When you look at how people go to church, where they worship, where they live, where they go to school, where they send the kids to school. So sometimes when I look at that data, I'm like, I'm not sure we should be so hopeful if really the data shows that we're still making choices to segregate because we see other groups as a threat. So the more that we can engage and understand each other, I think, again, our brain will naturally not have that threat detection. And that's what's going to facilitate and cultivate those relationships and that restoration of balance and harmony that really is what's going to be conducive and beneficial for our individual thriving as well as societal thriving. So that's what I wanted to share.
I think I have a sequel to what Sheila Caldwell is saying. I've noticed that very young children, as I said, you take 2 5 months old, and they play with each other spontaneously. Social scientists have tried to see what happens when you pose a parquet divided into black and white squares to a baby, because babies love to crawl and they don't care very much about the surface. But when they are presented with a parquet that looks like there's a drop, they turn around and look at their mother and see what the reaction is. And I think one of the problems with this flight or fight response is the impression that parents give to their children for what the child doesn't know. Is it a flight situation or what? Same thing with children and dogs. I've personally seen this, of a child being attracted to a dog, seeing another child stroke the dog, and checking almost invisibly to his or her mother for a sign, flight or fight, or hey, you go ahead, play with the dog. And you know, kids are very ignorant of how you play with a dog. Okay, sometimes the dog doesn't particularly like, and boy, kids are very quick to pick up on. "Arr." But thank you very much, Dr. Caldwell, for speaking up for that. I think that's a good point. Yes.
Nothing had caused such like about that. But looking at it like just hearing what everyone is saying, there might be hope in this part of the world. But where I come from, there's like a strong religious, undertone to like almost everything. Like we're talking about like how women are dehumanized in some people. And it will interest you to know that in my country, because we're very like divided religious. It's not even like it's sometimes like I have friends that are parents, like their mother and brother don't do certain things because they felt about it. But
So,
like,
would you speak a little less fast? I need to hear you clearly.
like some people, like some friends that have a parent that like kind of like tell them don't do certain things because future doesn't allow it. So I'm like moving forward, like how would people, because like it's not like foundational problem of the family telling you like where I come from, where we have like strong like family values and you just want to have something, everything's about religion. How do people break out of that shell? And you see in some countries, because they know how much technology educates people, to make us see that we are all like, there's no need for all those things. But they try to kind of like say like limit what, like some countries have bans on social media that you don't even, like last year in my country, Twitter was banned for the whole year. Because they see that we're kind of being educated by like social media and like things that are like we're seeing what's going on around the world. But there's still so many countries that are behind and trying to not become modern, quote unquote. I'm talking from the perspective of media. We're trying to, promote this global media. The world's almost like global village, like in small box. You can see what's going on in any part of the world. But there are countries who are trying to like not allow that happen. And it makes me feel like going forward, there's hope, but there's still like some way to go on a global perspective. Like here, like America is pretty diverse, so it's like, oh, there's hope. But in some countries, like they're trying so hard to keep it the way it has been, from time. Like there's so much, like in some countries, they can't even use Facebook, they can't use Instagram because the leaders know, and those countries have some are religious leaders and things like that, and they know that with this education, the younger people are kind of like getting more bold, to speak up for like things of equality and inclusion, but they're trying so hard to, and they take like drastic measures to punish people that try to break out of the norm. So I'm kind of like curious to know what you think is going to be like moving forward on a global scale. Do you really think, or what ways do you think we could like, break out of this shell? Do you think foreign influence helps, or I really don't know, because it's confusing because while we're doing the class, we touched on like so many different countries, how there's so much difference in the world, and what you will see as maybe right or wrong to some people just what they know. Like I was saying, like some my friends, their mothers told them, oh, you're not allowed to do this, not because they're trying to dehumanize them, but it's just what they believe. So in some cases, some people even know they're being dehumanized because they're used to that kind of thing.
Let me see if I can put this in only a few words for the electronic audience. You said you come from Nigeria and you're concerned about whether modernity will overcome the strictures that people who want to keep a structure and mores and behavior that conforms with an older practice in a new environment, and how that affects media. Is that a fair statement? Well, as you've heard, I spent 2 years in Afghanistan, as a Peace Corps director. And I told you the story about the volleyball game, and that if I had been caught being present at a mixed male-female volleyball game, I would have been lynched, and probably the other Americans as well. Afghanistan, or for that matter, Turkey, has no automobile insurance mechanism. So if you drive a car and you kill a child in Afghanistan or in Turkey, you are going to be lynched. A mob will instantly form, and your life is in very serious danger, because there is no insurance, and the only practice is kill for kill. You killed a child, we kill you. The volunteers asked me, why can't we drive? And I told them this story, which had happened in Afghanistan, which happened frequently when there are 15,000 American troops in Turkey and their dependents are there and they are driving in a country that doesn't have auto insurance. You know, it's unmodern, it's stupid, it's primeval. But if you are the stranger in that country, you've got to take note of that and act accordingly. And my predilection was to say no to the volunteers. You cannot drive because of these reasons. You have to use a taxi. So, you know, their response was very logical. Okay, they said, Mr. Blass, you pay us to pay for electricity because we need to be warm at night when it's 30 below. Okay, if you want us not to drive, you should pay for the taxi. Well, I had some problems trying to get Washington to agree to my paying them for taxi fares because they couldn't drive. But I thought it was a very legitimate question. My answer to you is, much as I favor modernization, I favor coeducation, I favor free media, living in a country, particularly in northern Nigeria, for example, where Islam and Islamic norms prevail, I think as the stranger, at least, it behooves me to respect their norms. And if there is to be change, it has to come from within northern Nigeria. I suspect that the Nigerians, not only the villagers who are assaulted by Boko Haram, but people around are saying, this is not the way we should live. But it's they who need to correct this. I mean, as Americans, we have a tendency to modernize, quote, other people in spite of their traditions. I remember an incident in the Navy where the stewards served turkey in the wardroom for the officers. And one of our officers was Jewish. And at the end of the meal, they said, Sydney, we've played a trick on you. It wasn't turkey, it was ham. And he vomited spontaneously, boom. And what I'm saying is, I think that's a terrible thing to do to a person, to simply in your face say, you've eaten what your religion says is poison. Okay, and to force him into a situation where he was terribly embarrassed by throwing up. and having to clean it up and so forth and so on. And it seems to me that one of the things that I like about Quaker doctrine or Quaker procedure is they talk about respecting that of God in everyone. And it seems to me that applies to these interracial, inter-religious, inter-everything discussions and actions. You need to respect that of God in someone who looks like the stranger, the foreigner, the immigrant, whatever. I think we've run over our time. Okay, one more question. Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Up, stand up. What? He didn't? Oh. Anybody else? Comment. I think, yes. The question is whether in my travels, I've been aware of this unconscious kind of reaction in, I guess, both adults and children, or not. What I'm struck by is this us-them phenomenon as being international. You know, I mentioned to someone that I went into a laundromat in England and spoke with the Pakistani owner and said, "What's it like to be a Pakistani in Britain?" And her reply was, "Oh, you noticed?" And I think this is very much around today. I think there are parts of Nigeria where, as an educated foreigner in the Igbo region of Nigeria, where I would be welcome, and other parts of Nigeria where I would not be welcome, partly because of this unconscious sense of otherness. He is not us. He is from outside. And I don't know that it has much to do with modernity. I mean, I think that's what Dr. Caldwell is right in speaking about this. I don't know if it's the limbic system or something, this flight or fright reaction in people. But I think you are right that education should be able to get you past that point. And that's why frankly, the Taliban saying that girls above the age of puberty can't go to school anymore, you know, 6th grade is the end of the story, is trying to perpetuate an inferior status on girls, women, etc. But it's up to the Afghans to fix that. The American army isn't going to do a damn thing to do it. We're strangers there, and we have to respect their norms, just as we would like to encourage them, but we can't do it. I went to Choate School, one of the best private schools in the country. They have a scholarship endowed by the parents of a woman graduate obviously after 1972, who joined the provincial reconstruction teams, the PCTs in Afghanistan, which were military units that went into the remote parts of Afghanistan to rebuild what had been, a school that had been bombed or a road that had holes in, whatever. And she was killed by an Afghan who was against the US Army. And the parents felt that they had to endow a scholarship in her name to teach people not to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, 2:45 will be a meeting. So you're more than welcome to come through, say hello, talk more one-on-one if you're interested, or spread the word to others. With that, thank you for coming.
I have one request. I know that I don't keep track of it. You all mind just maybe throwing around? And I'd be happy to share that.